Hey there folks, Caleb Downing with SDI, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I go about putting a new optic on a pistol and getting it ready to go to the range. So let's get into it. Alright, so first off, let's talk about the tools that we're going to need. Alright, so we have degreaser. This is going to be very important to prep everything. We're going to need some kind of a Loctite, a thread locker to hold the screws down. You want to make sure you put some kind of thread locker on that. In this case, we have blue Loctite. Don't use anything permanent like Roxette or like red Loctite. Nothing permanent because you're probably going to have to take this optic off at some point to change batteries. This particular one has a side-loaded battery, so we don't have to worry about that so much. But at some point, you might have to take that optic off, so don't use any permanent Loctite. Blue Loctite's a good way to go. You're going to need some kind of tool to take the screws off and tighten everything up and put the screws back on, and also some kind of tool to adjust your windage and elevation. A lot of times, these two tools do come with the optic, so you just need to do your homework and make sure they do come with that, or you probably have the Allen wrenches and Torx bits and screwdrivers that you're already going to need, right? You probably already have that, but make sure you do before you start these projects. You're also going to need, at the end of the video, if you want to do it the way that I do it, to have a laser bore sighter. This is very, very helpful in saving time and money at the range. Instead of shooting a whole bunch of ammo trying to get everything dialed in, this is going to save you a lot of time and money as far as that goes. And then to help with our screws, we'll talk about that in just a second, having a good set of calipers or an accurate set of calipers, that's going to help you as well. So those are the main tools that you're going to need. Let's get into it. All right, so the pistol we have today, this is a 48 MOS slide. It's actually on a 43X frame, but that doesn't really mean anything right now. But the 48 MOS slide, this is important to note because it has a factory RMSC cut optic cut on it. It has a plate on it right now. And the optic that we're using, this is a Zulissi Otter optic, and this is RMSC footprint compatible. So make sure your optic cut is compatible with the optic footprint that you're going to be putting on it, because not every pistol optic will fit every pistol slide cut. Make sure you do homework and know which ones are compatible with which ones you're trying to buy and which ones you're using. All right, so let's go ahead and get our slide ready. We've already cleared this guy and made sure that there's nothing in here, so don't work on a loaded gun. That's pretty basic stuff. We're going to go ahead and unscrew and detach our optic plate. All right, and then we're gonna go ahead and degrease it. That's what this degreaser is for. A lot of times, even if it's brand new, you're gonna have some oils and stuff in here, and especially if you've been using this firearm before you put an optic on it, you're gonna have some gunk in there. Generally, at some point, you're gonna have gunk in there, and you just wanna have a fresh start. So get this thing degreased and ready to go. All right, and the next step to do is to know what kind of screws you're gonna need. I would say, all the pistol optics that I've ever purchased, they come with multiple screws, right? Multiple screw styles or sets, thread patterns and sizes, because not every pistol is going to be the same. So I'm going to take a look at the screws that they provided with the 48 MOS, and these are relatively thick, kind of medium coarse threads, and I've already gone ahead and done it, and I've already selected the proper appropriate screws that were provided with the optic. Some of these are longer and skinnier, some are fatter and shorter. You just need to make sure you get the proper screws, and just to make sure that they fit, we can just dry fit them into the slide cut and make sure that they actually do screw in. You're not cross-threading anything, because I have had that happen, and that could be a pain in the butt. We talked earlier about calipers, and this is where this is very important, especially on the 48 MOS and the 43X MOS. And if we're looking at it this way, on the right screw, right, you actually can look down in and see the spring that has the tension on your extractor. So if you use too long of a screw, you're gonna pinch that extractor or the spring, and your gun's not gonna cycle right? So in this case, we're going to have to actually shorten one of our screws. I've already looked at this ahead of time. I know what we're gonna have to do, but that's something to note. You can't just go ahead and screw everything, lock it down with Loctite, and expect it to be good, especially on this one. Some other optics, or optic cuts, and pistols, you don't have to worry about that, but particularly on the 48 MOS, you do have to note that your right or port side screw, it is going to have to be shortened if it is too long. So to test if it's too long, we're going to go ahead and take our optic, we're going to put it on. I'm going to go ahead and finger tighten a couple of these mounting screws in, the ones that do fit. We're gonna make sure those guys are in. And we'll put the port side in, the screw that is non-modified. We're gonna go ahead and kind of just hand tighten it, not real tight, but hand tighten it. And this is one way you can tell on this particular slide that screw is too long. If you go down here and you lock open the slide and you go to push your extractor open, you're gonna notice it's not opening. It's not moving at all. If you go ahead and loosen that screw, you're gonna notice that it moves exactly like it's supposed to. So this is a very key important thing to do. If you just tighten everything down and throw a bunch of Loctite on it, you're gonna mess your gun up. It's not gonna cycle fine. You're actually gonna be crushing the spring and everything in there. You don't wanna do that. So what we're gonna have to do, and I've already done it, is you're gonna have to trim that screw, all right? So what I did is I took that screw out, I measured it with my calipers, and it measured at 0.43. And I took one of the screws because this company provides 3 screws. I don't know if this is one of the reasons why they do it, but they provided 3 screws instead of just 2. And I shortened one of the screws to 0.406, so almost 0.40, pretty much 0.40. And that is sufficient enough to shorten the overall length of this screw so that it can tighten down and lock down the optic, but not interfere at all with your spring for your extractor. It's very, very important that you do those kind of things. Do a little bit of homework. Do some common sense. I mean, do some common sense. If you can look down into those, into that screw hole, and you can see springs and stuff down in there, you know you're gonna have to make sure you check and make sure that you're not crushing those springs, because you're gonna be impeding the function of the pistol, right? So we've already done that. We've already gone ahead and shortened everything up. So that's another tool that you actually would need, is either a file, if you wanna do it nice and controlled, or in my case, I just used a Dremel and shortened everything up. But now that we have the short screw for the port side and the longer screw for the non-port side, for the left side of the gun, we're good to go as far as our length on our screws, and we've already prepped those screw holes with that degreaser. We're gonna go ahead and put a little Loctite on these screws and tighten everything down. You don't need to go crazy with the Loctite, but you do need to make sure you put some on it. It's just a little bit will do a long way. You just need a little bit on there, and it will go a long way, but you need it, all right? Especially for optics, you're gonna need a little bit of Loctite. Some people don't use it, but your optic's gonna end up working its way loose, especially if you clear malfunctions by smacking the optic, using the optic as like a shelf. You're gonna need some kind of a Loctite on here, right? Go ahead and get our shortened screw. Make sure you put them on the right side. Don't get them mixed up. Put our shortened screw on that side. And some optics, they will give you a torque spec that you need to have. Most of them probably won't. But getting them just nice and tight, especially if you have some Loctite, you'll be fine. Don't go crazy and strip your screws, because I've done that before. Don't go crazy. Just get these things nice and snug, just like so. And then you should be good to go, all right? One other thing that I will do is I will use a paint pen. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'll use a paint pen to mark those screws to make sure that I have a visual note to make sure that the screws are not backing out. So I'm just gonna put a little dot on both of these screws, and that way I can always look down and make sure that the screws have not started to back out. Because if they started to back out and those witness marks have moved, then I know something's off and something's not right, and I need to fix it. All right, so now that we have everything on there, we're gonna go ahead and use our laser bore sighter. This is an important step. I think it's an important step because it really is gonna save you time and money at the range. Instead of having to shoot a whole bunch to get onto paper and then fine tune it, you can go ahead and get the coarse adjustments done and then just do the fine tuning at the range, all right? So let me show you how I do that. Again, it doesn't matter exactly which brand you use. It really makes no difference. This particular model, it takes an index off the front, and then you have different sized rear portions depending on the caliber of your firearm. And this is just going to align the laser with the bore of your firearm. That's all it does. That's simply all it does. The only thing I would recommend you do not do is use those laser bore sighters that are like a bullet, they look like a bullet or a projectile. Those, for me, have never worked. These guys, they seem to work a lot better. So you find the appropriate adjustment on one side, or insert on one side, that's for the appropriate bore of your caliber, in this case for 9mm. And they're slightly adjustable depending on how much you screw them on and stuff, but make sure it's a nice snug fit. You don't want a bunch of wobble. Make sure it's nice and snug. Don't bend your stem as you put it in. And then you're going to want to go ahead and tighten everything up. You kind of screw it in and tighten it up, and you can feel that if your laser is moving around a little bit, you know it's not tight. You want it to be nice and tight. Now we have the laser on, and I'll show you what it looks like behind the camera, and I'll show you how I adjust it. All right, so here we go. Now that we're behind the camera, you can see that our red dot is the red dot from the optic, all right? The green laser, that is from the laser bore sighter. You can see they do not match up. Now, at this distance, this is like 2 yards, maybe. We don't want everything to be exactly matched up. We just want it to be, as far as our windage, we want our windage to be matched up, and then we want our red dot, our pistol dot, to actually be right above the green dot, because there's an offset that's going on, and we're really close. We're like at 2 yards. And if you get it about that close, as far as the camera goes, I think that's about as close as we're gonna need, then we should be good. That means that when we get to the range, that we will be on paper. We won't have to shoot a whole bunch of rounds at 2 yards and then 3 yards and then keep backing up. We should be able to start out at about 15 yards and then work ourselves back to 20 yards to get everything sighted in. All right, folks, so that's how I go about mounting a new optic to a slide. Make sure you use some Loctite to lock those screws in so they don't start working around on you, because that's a lot of forces put on those screws. Also, when you're going to buy a slide or to get your slide cut for an optic, make sure you have those recoil bosses. Those recoil bosses are a big deal. They really help the optic to sit solid and not move, right? Not put all that stress on the screws. Some optics cuts, and when you get your optics cut, sometimes everything's just cut flat and straight and there are no recoil bosses, and all that, everything, all the force, all the energy is put on those screws. And I've had screws break. So you don't want to do that. You want to have those recoil bosses. Sorry, that's just a side point, but I think it's pretty important. But that's how I go about doing this. It's worked for me. I mount a lot of pistol optics to slides, and I change them out all the time. Having those witness marks with that paint pen or a gray Sharpie, that's a good way to do it. That really helps too. It's just a visual confirmation that your screws have not worked themselves loose. It also helps you know that if you start shooting and your groups start opening up real wide and you lose your zero, it can help you know that maybe it's the optic and not the screws that have come loose if you have witness marks. If you don't have witness marks, you might have to tighten everything back up and then go shoot again and then realize that it was your optic that was messed up, not the screws, all right? So that's some stuff to note, some stuff that's important. Also, I think it's a really big time and money saver to invest in one of these laser bore sighters. Really does help you, really does save time and money at the range. And when you get to the range, you get to have more fun actually shooting instead of just trying to dial it in, your new optic and setup and everything. That can get a mess. Anyway, guys, I hope that was interesting. I hope you found that helpful. That's how I go about doing this. How do you go about doing it? Do you have any tips and tricks that would help people out when they go to mount their new optics, whether that be on a pistol, or maybe we'll do a whole video on how I mount my new optics on my rifles, because it's pretty much the same thing. A couple little differences, but pretty much the same thing. All right, that's it. I'm Caleb Downing with SDI. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found it helpful. Hopefully we'll catch you guys in the next video. See you.